Julie, thank you so much for coming in the studio. It's good to see you again.
Good to be with you.
I know you can't see me.
I can't see you.
But it's good that you're here. All right, so at Acculturated, you've got a piece now. I learned a new phrase, time poverty. I didn't. Is this what happens when the time bandits come
yes.
steal your time? Then
That's
you
exactly.
are stuck in time poverty?
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. No, it's a phrase. It's a new phrase the feminists are using, claiming that women do much more of the domestic duties than men do. Child rearing, laundry, dishes, vacuuming, you name it. The women are doing it. The men aren't doing it. And this is another part of the patriarchy keeping women down. And so there's this sort of effort afoot to tackle this issue. But what I talk about is that people are also trying to say that that women in developing nations are also suffering from time poverty. And so I sort of attack that whole narrative in my piece.
Okay, so let's stick with the developed world for a second. How are we supposed to tackle this pressing problem here?
I'm sure there's some sort of program that people are working on, right? Where you have to sort of, log your time vacuuming or doing the dishes. But, what I talk about is in this piece is what feminists often miss is the things that men do. And they don't get credit for. I talk about in my own domestic situation that my husband and I have sort of, divided the domestic duties. I mean, it's not on a chart. It's not written down. We just sort of do these things. I mean,
right.
I stay home with the kids. I pick the kids up. I sort of mostly take care of the kids. And I do a lot of the cleaning of the house, but then, and then I make dinner and then my husband, he cleans up dinner. But then in the beginning of my piece, I talk about how, I'll then wander into the kitchen later that night and there's, the stove hasn't been wiped down and the counters haven't been wiped down. And there's like a piece of bread on the floor or like a lemon wedge on the counter. I mean, to me, that's not clean. Like he hasn't quite done a perfect job. And so what I suggest in this piece is perhaps women need to relax their standards a little bit instead of expecting, the husband or the partner. I mean, my husband, it's honestly, it's not that he's a jerk and thinks I need to finish it up. He honestly doesn't see these things laying around and doesn't really see it as a problem. And so I sort of suggest that we might need to relax our standards a little bit. And secondly, my husband does a lot of stuff that he doesn't get credit for on the domestic front. I mean, he kills all the bugs. He takes the garbage out. He fixes everything that goes wrong in the house, right? So there are things that he does that don't sort of fit into these sort of convenient feminist categories of domestic duties. So I think men don't get enough credit, and I also think, I think women have very high standards of clean and organization, and they might try to relax those standards a little bit, to make for every happiness on all fronts.
Right, a happy medium somewhere.
Yeah.
And I would also note, if you have kids, then you have the added benefit of having the kids do some of these chores, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know why that doesn't come into play at all.
Yeah.
I mean, my 15-year-old, that's one of his jobs now he's got to empty the dishwasher. And we fill it up, but he's got to empty the dishwasher. All of our kids, my 10-year-olds know how to do their laundry.
That's so good.
And they do their own laundry.
That's so good.
I mean, why is this, again, why does everything, you want some extra time, you want to put some a time in the time bank so you're not time poor? Teach your kids to fend for themselves in many ways. Teach your kids to be responsible, and then you take it off of your shoulders.
Well, that's another thing is when I give my children a chore to do, I often have to lower my standards there too, because they're just not going to clean a toilet the way I clean a toilet, right? They're not real. They're not going to sweep the way I sweep. So, I think we all need to make concessions, and I think sometimes when you aren't willing to do that, you end up doing it all. I remember when I worked in an office years ago before I had kids, and we would get interns, and I always hated dealing with the interns because to explain the process to them, it took longer than me just doing it. So I never worked with interns. And so I think that's the same thing on domestic. Now that I'm a mom, I sometimes have to, okay, it's not going to be perfectly clean, but he did his best. But that's important because you have to give kids these responsibilities. I reviewed a book late last year by Julie Lythcott-Hames. She was a former dean at a college, and she wrote this book about how she's shocked that kids can't do basic things like laundry. They don't know how to put a napkin in their lap or cut their food or simply have a conversation with another adult. They have a really difficult time managing these pretty basic tasks of being an adult, and so chores are a part of that. Sharing the domestic duties are a part of that. So if women are going to complain about, they have all this time poverty, I think it might have a little bit to do with control.
Well, and then you say as well in the later part of your piece that Melinda Gates is very concerned about the time poverty in developing countries, when you say perhaps the women in these developing countries have bigger concerns over
like their children dying,
who's doing the dishes and putting them away, right?
Yeah. I mean, you've got people with life expectancies that are, like in the 1900s for the United States. I mean, and before that, you got childhood mortality that's, tragic, and at tragic rates. And I don't think women in that country really care about who's doing the vacuuming. They've got bigger concerns. And so it frustrates me when, Western women, Western billionaires, talk about these things as if this in any way registers on the minds of these women in these developing nations. Again, they've got bigger concerns, and I would hope that an organization like the Gates Foundation doesn't waste its time trying to come up with ways to solve time poverty when children are dropping dead from infectious diseases. It just doesn't seem like a good set of priorities there.
Maybe a little bit of projection, right? I mean, maybe Melinda Gates feels like there's just not enough hours in the day, Julie, and so therefore, and I'm sure if you're Melinda Gates, there probably aren't enough hours in the day, right? There's a lot
of this though. You have the first.
Let's have some perspective.
Yeah, you have the first lady going to some of these countries overseas and trying to sort of relate to these women, right? She talks about her own, experience growing up and having this oppressive childhood, right? And she always tries to do that. She always tries to act like somehow she had the same experience as these women in countries where they can't drive or vote or marry who they want. I mean, I sometimes wish some of these Western women would just say, you know what, you've got it worse. You really do. And I can't relate to this. But so I think that's a little bit of that, is trying to relate, find common issues, that Western women and women in developing nations can relate on. And I don't think there are many. And so I think that's kind of where she's trying to go with that, but it doesn't work. And it doesn't do them any favors.
No, it does not. Well, listen, Julie Gunlock, I appreciate you doing us a favor and coming in studio today. See, again, you're having to do all the work. You're having to come to our studio. We're not going to your house.
I'm so tired.
So thank you.
Pay for parking.
You don't hear it enough. So thank you. Right?
Exactly. I love coming in. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon. Julie Gunlock, you can find her at IWF.org, the Independent Women's Forum. And we're going to be taking Julie and some of the women from the Independent Women's Forum to the NRA Range here before long. So we'll tell you more about that coming up soon. Thanks, Julie. We'll talk to you soon.